Okay, our next session is all about building trustworthy AI. It's one of the most important topics in technology today, bar none. This session is going to be bringing together researchers, business and civil society representatives, and they're going to analyze and debate how the industry can keep on developing artificial intelligence in a safe and ethical way without killing innovation. I'm going to tell you a bit about our fantastic moderator. She is the managing director of Data Economy, one of the top 10 AI magazines and educational platforms in the world. She is also the founder of Data Natives, Europe's largest data science conference, and much more. As with all our speakers, do reach out to them on LinkedIn to find out more about them. Look them up in the MWC app. I hope you've all installed. So ladies and gents, please give a very loud, warm 4 years from now welcome for Miss Elena Pugia. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi. We've decided actually to walk all in together, but of course I would love to present also and introduce the panelists that I'll be working with, having this discussion with. So thank you very much for the lovely introduction. I'm in great company with Gemma Galdon-Clavel, who's the founder and CEO of Ethicas Research and Consulting, and with Monica Rikic, who is an electronic artist and creative coder. They will present themselves in a minute as well, and Monica has also a short presentation to show you since she's the artist, and she would like to communicate all the topic that we have here present today with her artwork, because what speaks louder than words is images. So as we were discussing the topics of today's conversation, I think what's really important for me to shape this is actually how can you create good technology, right? How you can create technology that is good for the users and actually take society at the forefront. Myself, and actually a thing is missing from the introduction as well, I'm originally an art curator, and I got into tech because of my fascination with art. We had a short conversation at the backstage how a lot of the times art is glorifying tech, but actually we, I think in this small community, we're very much interested in art and tech that makes looks at tech from a critical standpoint and does things that would actually reflect on how society is and what can we do to prevent that. And I'm also personally an advocate and an evangelist at Poly, which is a data privacy platform. And I'm really curious to hear about what Gemma is doing, actually auditing algorithms from that perspective. So I was thinking to shape the conversation by looking at the widening gaps between ethics and frontier technologies, issues with current technologies, so filter bubbles, engagement loops, biases, and what organizations and engineers can do to ensure that they're creating technology that is not as harmful as what is created today. And essentially, we're going to be looking at from technology and tools, art, education, regulation. So, Gemma, would you like to present yourself shortly to our audience?
Sure, you already said quite a lot. So I'm Gemma Galdon-Clavel. I lead an organization called Ethicas, which is based here in Spain, but we have people all over the world. We are global pioneers in algorithmic auditing, and you probably never heard this before. You didn't know that algorithms could be audited. So basically what we do is we open up the black box of AI, we identify the 7 moments of bias and inefficiency in AI systems, and we fix them. Now, is AI auditing the solution to all of our tech problems and concerns? No. But think of algorithmic auditing as the seatbelt of a car. Will a seatbelt save you from everything? No. But no one would buy or sell a car without seatbelts. The vision that we have is a world where AI always comes with seatbelts. Right now, we are deploying AI systems without the equivalent of seatbelts. So we're part of the ecosystem of trust that needs to be built around AI systems.
Great. I like the metaphor, putting your seatbelt. Thank you very much, Gemma. Monica, we would love to see.
Hello? Yeah, okay.
We would love to see this topic engaged from your side through your artwork.
Yeah, yes, I would like to see it too. I don't know. Okay, no? Okay. Well, I guess I'll just start.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Yes, we have it here. Well, hello. My name is Monica Rikic. I'm a new media, electronic artist and creative coder from Barcelona. I've been recently been awarded the Catalan Culture National Award. And I'm going to, I brought some images because sometimes it's a bit difficult to make our head into the art formalization of some work, so I just have like a couple of images here to present. I work with technology, although my education is in fine arts, and then I did a master's in digital arts, and currently I just finished a master's in contemporary philosophy. So these are my three main pillars, my three main topics, which are art, technology, and philosophy, and trying to trying to think technology not only as a tool, but also as a conceptual framework that, that all my practice moves around. So this first image that you can see helps me explain the early works of my career, which I mainly focused on creating educational tools with technology. And also, as you can see, I don't just work with code, with electronics, with digital materials, but I also mix them with non-digital, with analogic things like, for example, here, these foam cubes that are actually, this is actually a tool for teaching teenagers how to program code. How to program sound, like do sound programming with these cubes. Also, another important thing that I use for my artworks is the idea of games. So I do video games that go outside from the screen, and that, for example, as you can see here, where people can sit on their own controllers that we make, like we make handmade controllers, like alternative controllers for video games, and then people can have an embodied experience about what they do. These experiences are also they are more immersive by using theater tools, okay? So in my works, I always try to make this framework, this narrative that encapsulates all the work, and trying to put people in this new world through with theater strategies, kind of. And this brings me to this other artwork that is the last one that I'm going to talk about before focusing on the artificial intelligence works that I've been doing lately. So theater, I use theater in role-play games, so people can become somewhere else through the art pieces. And in this one, for example, that we presented in Ars Electronica in year 2016, we were trying to make people imagine how a technological future would be, and let them experience this world by using different tools like this one, where they could interact in the same world. So in the past year, as I was saying just now, in the past years I've been focusing conceptually, I've been focusing my practice around the idea of artificial intelligence, but not, as I said before, not especially as a tool, but a conceptual framework where I try to imagine from art alternative post-singular identities, where just stop thinking about, I wanted to stop thinking about how would it be if, in the mainstream thought, people say, how would it be a future where robots are as intelligent or more intelligent than humans? Instead of thinking about that, thinking from art, saying okay, let's think that this day is now. What other solutions, what other identities can we imagine from art to these super intelligent artificial entities? So I created a world where this artwork where I led the public to create their own robotic world, where I try to make the reverse process of artificial intelligence, where algorithms classify humans. In this project, I would make humans that had no previous experience with technology to classify robots as humans, and trying to make them this autonomous agent, mobile robotic installation where they would interacting from this data that we put on it. I also started imagining futures for surveillance. So what would robots do with our information if they were the same as humans? So I thought that maybe they would start gossiping about our information and not trying to destroy it, just chat and gossip about it. That's why they are hanging in ropes, because here in Spain, like my early memories I have of my mom gossiping with the neighbors was where they were hanging, clothes and stuff like that. Also, I was imagining artwork, like robots that were shown as art, and they had the imposter syndrome because they couldn't be creative as humans. They can be creative, but they can be creative in their own thing. I don't think they really, like, if cognitive systems, sorry, I don't like to talk about artificial intelligence. Cognitive systems really have the need for expression through art. It will never be like the ones we have on humans. So this little guy here has an imposter syndrome, and it's suffering, and it's breathing, and you can actually kill it if you want to finish with its suffering. But if you think you kill it, then you assume that it's alive. So a lot of things come in conversation with these little, theater pieces in small artworks. And one of my last works, I was starting to, from the imposter syndrome, obviously the next step was imagining machines with existential crisis. So really, I started imagining that the normal outcome of a machine having a human consciousness would be to have an existential crisis, because we are completely different. We are of a completely different nature, so the machine would need to find its own consciousness, and that would take it to spirituality. And this is another work that was talking about artificial spirituality. And the last one that you can actually see at the moment in Caixa Forum, if you're interested to see the Homo Ludens exhibition, it's a machine that plays with itself. And it's talking about the entertainment needs of machines, maybe. And if you look at the machine too much, it tells you to go away. So it doesn't want to play with humans. And that's it.
Wow.
I'm going to finish. It's very fast. You can check on my web if you want more information.
A lot of things to unpack here, I think. And I really like actually how you imagine these artificial creatures, like somehow they have their life on their own, right? And they continue. And I think like one of the main conversations, at least for me, with some friends of mine, are also like the next step of transcendentalism and becoming cyborgs. But I'm not going to go that far. I'm going to save that for a different conversation. I think taking like your work as, let's say, the starting point of this conversation, I would love to revert to Gemma and ask her, what would be do you think, since you're doing algorithmic auditing, right? And we just talked about works that they are like humans, let's say, in a way, right? They gossip, they exist, they have like artificial spirituality. Do you think there's something that, like ethic by design, can we have a system that is ethical at its core, or do we always need to audit these algorithms?
Or we can have systems that are ethical by design, and actually everything around us is ethical and legal and socially acceptable by design. So one of the biggest issues in our time is that we have allowed technology to not be subject to any kind of regulation. I always use the example of a yogurt, something as random and small and not important as a yogurt. For a yogurt to come to your house, the controls and the regulation starts with the cow. There's regulation on where the cow is born, how it's bred, what it eats, the field, the temperature of the milk, how it's transported, how it's how it's turned into a yogurt, pasteurizado, how it's turned into a yogurt, how it goes to the supermarket, how it comes to you. So all those little steps are regulated. And if you buy it and it's off, you still have all the regulation around consumer protection that protects you. So everything that hits you as a consumer and a citizen has gone through a process of regulation, except technology. We've allowed a world where technology has no rules. And so all we need for technology to do is to be subject to the same controls that we subject any piece of medicine or any piece of food. Why? Because we want it to be better, trustworthy? No. Because we want to reconcile innovation with social acceptability. Would you have allowed your medical systems to give you a vaccine against COVID that hadn't gone through clinical trials? You probably would not have. So through regulation, what we do is build trust. the fact that we know that the yogurt has been controlled since the cow and the temperature and everything gives us trust when you go to the supermarket. That's what we're missing in technology. So what we need to do is think about the systems of regulation that we have for everything else, for medicine, for food, for toys, for chairs, for furniture. The same thing, the same ecosystem of control, we need to have it for technology. Audits are one of the things that we can use and develop. They're not the only thing. We need a lot more things, but they're definitely one step in the right direction and one step into building things and systems that are ethical by design. And I mean ethical not in terms of whether they can do right or wrong. Current technologies are very far away from the worlds of autonomous, conscious systems. When we audit systems, what we find is that current AI is oftentimes a glorified Excel sheet. So real life ML and AI technologies are quite far away from what you see on television. I often say that the general population and politicians don't talk about technology, they talk about science fiction. So when you work with actually auditing systems and looking at how they work, what you find is that there's a big gap between what people think technology can do and what it actually does. So we can build those systems of regulation without needing to go to the will it do right, will it do wrong, will it be conscious. There's so many little small steps, easy steps that we can make that we haven't done. So for me, the main thing is how come we have not subjected technology and AI to the same demands and guarantees that we demand from any other field or area in the market.
That's a very good point. It was actually a dramatic point. I would have to say, I mean, I think my answer to this would be that because when we started with technology, we didn't take it as seriously, right? It was a startup game, it was kind of like a children's game. But now we see, like through also artworks, like Monica's artworks, that wait a minute, it has like a life of its own, and it's there, and it's somehow like vibrant, you know? Like we do need to regulate it somehow. What do you think, Monica, like in terms of, from that perspective, as an artist observing the world and creating this type of technology, what would be like, coming from that perspective, but like from a more philosophical and societal point of view, like what would be your suggestion?
Well, yes, and what I was just thinking, what were you saying, like what happened through the evolution of technology, and I think we changed ethical, I don't really like that word, sorry, but ethical like development through commodity, you know, it's easy, it's simple, you know, it goes quick, and that's how we change, and that has also affected the way we build our identity and the way we are building the world too. So the impact of technology just doesn't affect the technology, I think it affects to our social relations a lot. And I completely agree with you saying everything is science fiction, and that's one thing I also learned while working, because I'm a programmer, and while working with the algorithms, the cognitive algorithms, especially the ones that most artists have access to, you know, it was like, that's kind of boring, you know? Like I'm working from art, you know, I can imagine other things and then talk about all these topics, about what's the responsibility companies and we as citizens should take through this development, right? And I think there's two main problems with this idea, or two main problems with this idea that people have, this science fiction idea of the society has about science fiction. First of all is the idea of calling it intelligence. That's what I was saying before. I don't like to call it artificial intelligence, because calling it intelligence, it means that there's only one intelligence. Right, you're trying to universalize the world intelligence, which I think is completely impossible compared to humans, at least. And if this is the idea of intelligence we have, it's basically productivity and efficiency, you know, and production and work. So it's very related to some capitalist needs in a way. And also is the medium. So all this idea that the technology is going to, you know, come and be better than humans and blah, blah, blah. It's a way of violence, you know, it's like symbolic violence, you know, that the companies can affect, you know, you can put fear to people and stuff like that. I'm talking about the mainstream world, you know, like how all this thing affects. So what I try to pose with my artworks is just trying to think, open these new alternative ways of thinking about technology to create mainly what you were talking about, Gemma. You know, like saying we still can decide. We must decide on what is going to happen to technology. It doesn't matter how far we've gone. You know, so it's like let's start now, but let's start. You know, let's break these black boxes. Like I think the work you do with your company is like it's what it needs to be done. You know, if I've also like in my field, we've worked with, for example, with workshops with these two women from the UK that are specialized in breaking bias, like a gender-based bias in assistance, in robot assistance, you know, and by this we're trying to create this model, like data set of, for us, talking robot that didn't have like a women voice or didn't have all these things that we usually relate to them. Yeah.
Well, okay, again,
Sorry.
thinking about like how to phrase, I mean, there's two important things that I would like to, let's say, open the gate, the black box of this conversation to. One is the humanization, let's say, of what you're saying, like artificial intelligence, right? Like making it a human. But then at the same time, it is created by humans, so somehow it has the flaws of a human, right? I was having a conversation, I think also before backstage, we kind of touched upon it, like, basically, like why, you said it as well, like Gemma, why don't we put like people who are creating these algorithms into it sort of kind of off the same way we do with doctors, right? A doctor is responsible for human life. Why would someone who's programming the systems with their own biases and with their own, you know, prejudice, why shouldn't they have a specific list of things that do's and don'ts? I can't do this, I can do that, right? You mentioned the seatbelt before. I think like a very common example that it was used in the beginning of ethics and AI was that, well, you know, if we're gonna do like driverless, no, is it like a self-driving cars, how would design, who will it kill? You know, if it has to choose someone to die, who would it be? The person who dies, right? So I guess like cutting a long story short, like what I'm thinking is, well, there is some sort of like humanization in the systems, right? And we need to somehow also make it trustworthy. We're building trust through regulations. So what could be the right approach to do that? Isn't GDPR, for example, like a first step? I know, I'm sure you heard it a lot. Like, what is it? Like, the second thing I wanted to also highlight is, as I said, like I'm a privacy advocate. That's how I got into the tech scene. That's the kind of artwork I was following of people like commenting on like privacy, and we know now with all this like exposure on social media and so forth, like our data is everywhere. It can create another human being of our digital footprint, right? So like, does that mean then that we should reconsider how we share our data? Should it be like only algorithms we share? And what kind of algorithms? So, a lot of things to unpack.
Yes.
Pick your battle and start.
There's so many places where I could start. Well, first, I think it's a huge mistake to render technology human and to use words like artificial intelligence, when intelligence is a very human phenomenon, and even learning. Like, I think that we've made a mistake in terms of communicating what technology can actually do by anthropomorphizing concepts around technology. And I think that's one of the reasons why people talk about science fiction. And we keep, there's this Amara law, we keep overemphasizing long-term impacts of technology when we neglect the short-term ones. So we keep preparing ourselves for things that may never happen when we're constantly overlooking harms and problems that are already emerging, like bias in technology. And my main concern is that I'm a firm believer in the possibilities of technology. I think that AI opens lots of doors for a lot of very good things. But I think that if we underestimate its negative impacts, like its ability to reproduce bias, inefficiency, to make bad decisions, to create a black box worlds, we may kill something that is really, that could be really useful. I was really struck by, I don't know if you've seen this TV series on Netflix, I think, New Amsterdam. It's about doctors and doctors. It's a hospital. And in one of the episodes, there's this black woman who's gonna have a baby, and she wants a natural birth. And but the computer says no. The computer says you need a cesarean. And at one point, the hero doctor, as you always have a hero doctor in those programs, says, why don't we change the data of the woman that we introduced in the system? Why don't we say she's white? And they do that, and all of a sudden the machine says natural birth. The fact that that was on a mainstream channel in a very widely seen series really made me think that this trust for AI is going way beyond small communities and is beginning to permeate the general population, specifically around health. We are seeing more and more this trust in AI decisions around health. So I just fear that if we don't invest in building that trust through lots of ways, through education, through art, through regulation, GDPR is a great tool if anyone was to actually comply with GDPR. It's a great tool that's been underdeveloped. But if we don't invest in all those things, if we don't build the seatbelts of AI, I fear that people will just not trust those systems anymore, and we will use the really valuable things of AI. And I think it'll be our mistake. Like, we can do it differently. We can build AI in the same ways that we build vaccines, in the same way that we build cars. We build them, we maximize the innovation potential of society, but we build safeguards around it. Why don't we do the same thing with AI systems?
Mm-hmm.
Building trust, that's very important, I agree. I guess I'd love to hear Monica's perspective as well on this specific.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree with Gemma. Like, as I was saying before, I don't like to use the word intelligence, especially because it's very human-focused, and using human technology and all these things, in the end, I think what it creates, it's a weird and abstract competition between humans and algorithms. And I think that the way to go is to see algorithms as okay, you understand me what I mean? Like, to see all these technologies as part of humans, as an extension of our existence, individual and collectively, because it's built by our data, as you were saying, and it can be changed by the data we put on it. So it's part of us. So before in the backstage also, we were talking about this. Well, there's this. A recent article that it was published here in CCCB Lab about these two friends. So these two colleagues that work with artificial intelligence. They are philosophers, and they were talking about how important is it to see artificial intelligence as a common wealth, like as a common thing that we have, and we have to take care of it, and we have to reclaim our rights through how the artificial intelligence systems and machine learning, whatever, that rule our daily lives is done. And also, I think that, I was also reading not that long ago an article about a woman, I think her surname was Veloso, and she was talking about that a way for building trust with algorithm is to create machines that are able to explain themselves. How did they get to this?
Explainable AI.
Yeah, explaining, So they can explain how they are, like how they got to that, how they jumped to that conclusion, or why do they think this woman needs, to don't have a natural birth, and explain how did they do, but mainly, and it's a thing that we're talking about a lot in this conversation, which is breaking the black box again, and opening up, and I would add this other part, which is we have to gain this concept about technology being a part of ourselves, and not a separate thing. And actually now, that's what I really like the beginning of the internet and technology with all the cyber-feminism movements and all that stuff, where internet was a opening space where everybody could be anyone, like the VNS Matrix or some other groups. And that's a way where people, that's a moment where if you, for example, if you wanted to have a website, you really needed to do the server, you really needed to touch technology. You trust technology because you thought it was a freedom space because you really could touch it. You built it, so you trust it, of course. But if we don't see ourselves as part of it, we don't take a part on the development of it, we will never trust it. I think that's one of the main points for me.
I mean, it keeps on coming back to trust, right? And I think trust is like the basis of everything, human existence, relationships, et cetera, and I can get philosophical on days about this, but I guess like you're talking about trust, you mentioned explainable AI, so essentially the more you know about something, the rationale behind it, the more you can trust it because it's transparent, it over-communicates, right? So it tells you exactly what to do. But I think like also, I think everybody has their own biases and prejudice, we are 3 people working in this space, right? So like when we had a conversation before about art that is, let's say, glorifying technology, like my thought was, no, I don't know that thing. So I guess like what I'm trying to say here is like, let's simplify this for someone who is not in this space. What can they do, right? What are the steps? How can we, like how civilians can be part of GDPR, and how, as you said, Monica, like if you're not part of it, you don't trust it. Well, now this things is like so big, right? Internet, everybody has a mobile phone. Everybody's like has an internet connection. Like it's more important than water sometimes for me. Like I need the internet more than I need water. So like what can you do as a civilian or a data scientist or an AI expert or like a curator or whatever? Like what can you do to contribute to this and to make it ethical? For both of you.
I actually think it's quite unfair to put the responsibility of ethical AI on the individuals that are part of the chain. Like you were talking before about, maybe engineers need to sign an oath. Would you have trusted a vaccine, a COVID vaccine, if the biologist had signed an oath? I don't think so.
I think a lot of people are still not trusting it, but that's another conversation.
But I think there's a lot of other things. So, the oath of the biologist can be one thing, but in the end it was clinical trials. The fact that it has been tested, that we have institutions all over the world that look at the results, that scrutinize what has been done, and that give a final seal of approval. So I think that we need small things, but we also need big things that can convey that trust. Because AI is bound to make more and more sensitive decisions. Like I think one of the things that's changed in the last couple of years is that up until very recently, AI was mainly used and deployed in the entertainment sector. And so you had the algorithms for Spotify, Netflix, the Alexa. And so if that makes mistakes, if the suggestion you get on what film to watch next is wrong, so be it. It's not the end of the world, and no one demands that AI knows it really well. And it's actually like a funny thing. Oh, you got that really, really wrong. You really think that's the song I want to listen to now? So it's like it's a fun thing, and the cost of making mistakes is very low. What's happened in the last couple of years is that the same engineers who were developing AI systems for recommender systems in the entertainment industry are now developing systems to prioritize people in an emergency room, to use in educational systems, to decide who goes to university, to decide who gets a public grant, who gets unemployment. So all those systems that could afford to make mistakes until a couple of years ago now are operating in high-risk areas where the stakes are a lot higher, but the technologies continue to be the same. So one of the issues that we have is that the lazy tech that you could afford to develop 2 years ago, now if you want to operate in the high-risk sectors, you can't do that anymore. And so I think that the AI industry needs to step up their game and understand that if you want to sell technology for a hospital, you cannot recycle what you were selling to Netflix or to any shop to optimize their customer service. Because the mistakes you could afford in those low-risk environments are not the same that you can afford in high-risk environments. So I think that the technology world is failing to step up their game and to improve the way they develop and they validate technology. So can a single data scientist or engineer solve this? I don't think so. And I think it's unfair to ask individuals to solve a structural problem. I think that the best thing we can do as citizens and as professionals is require that the institutions that ensure that things work well and that when technology hits us, it does it in ways that will not produce harm. I think that's the main thing we can be asking for. So I think that our role needs to be more of an activist for the ecosystem of regulation than an individual response to all those challenges. That would be at least.
Yeah, I completely agree that in the end, we as citizens, and I include myself, is putting pressure on public institutions mainly in order to take responsibility on the platforms that are being used for public things, like, for example, education. Like I can understand that it's very useful to use private companies as a tool for public schools, but it can also be a little bit complicated in some points, especially when we deal again with the black boxes. That's why, for example, in Barcelona, there's this initiative of creating a public platform for education. So we don't need to go to the private, because you are like letting all the data from your kids, underage people, to serve all these data sets. So I think, we can only put pressure, I guess, and I completely agree that it's not our responsibility. I always think that people do their best, And also, when you were talking about that the algorithms make mistakes and all the mistakes that are done, yes, just integrate mistakes and disagreement, in our world, because I think all these machines are not perfect and not as humans, and it's good, that's what makes us develop. So creating a perfect world through machines and algorithms is not going to be fun at all.
When we audit algorithms, we always say that we have identified these 7 instances of bias from the data selection to implementation. Because one of the things that we were finding is that people have so much trust in technology that they fail to design what happens when technology fails. And so when technology makes a mistake, so we were working with technology used at airports, the technology that decides if you can actually enter a country or not. And because the sellers of the technology were like, oh, this is perfect. This machine just knows everything that's happened and knows whether a person needs to enter a country or not. Well, international treaties, data may be expired in the system. So when we were auditing the front end systems, we found lots of spaces for problems. But no one ever thought about what happens when the computer makes a mistake. And so the US had to be pioneering in creating a redress mechanism, but after implementing border control technologies. And Europe did the same thing. So the US discovered this, and then Europe made the same mistake. We implemented all the technology, and then we're like, oh, but technology can make mistakes. Yeah. So oftentimes when you audit algorithms, it's not only about the technical sides, but also about how it interacts with humanity, and what part of the decision is made by a human. So I think it's really important to see AI systems, AI technologies as systems that are incorporated into complex societies that are messy and make mistakes, but how do we make sure that the technology do not make those mistakes worse, and do not make them less transparent, and do not put people in the black hole of an algorithmic mistake that they cannot dig themselves out of.
Or I like how the conclusion of this, I'll give you mine, add anything if you'd like. I like the conclusion of this is not one person's responsibility, it's a collective responsibility, right? It's a system that needs to always update itself. It's a system that makes mistakes, so the more we know about it, the more open it is to us, the more we can work with it. And we need to step up our game, right? I think I'm just summarizing this kind of bullet points. I also think this, going back at it, the glorification of technology to the point of humanization of it, it's certainly something that, because we're afraid of it, right? We're afraid of what it is and we don't trust it. But actually, if we just look at it from that perspective, we need to put systems in place. There needs to be companies like yours, Gemma, that actually does the work to audit it. There needs to be people like Monica that actually looks at this and makes a critical observation and observes this from a societal and philosophical perspective. And we also need, I would say, data privacy advocates, right? Because for me, it's very important as an activist in this domain that we protect our data and our privacy, and we don't lose ourselves in this internet world or this Web3 world. And I think with that, I would conclude this, and I would love actually, because we are 3 women on the stage, that we also take a picture all together, if that's okay. I know I'm being very contradictory. I'm not posting it, and I'm not going to go on a cloud. But if that's okay for you,
sure.
Yeah.
How do you want to take it?
Like this, just. Right, and with that, we do have 3 minutes if you want to say something like a final words, but I've added my conclusion from my side.
Well, maybe, because you were talking about public institutions, we actually work mainly with the market for 2 reasons. One, because in all of our work, we found that public administration does things worse than private companies. There's more non-compliance in the public sector than in the private sector. And second, because I think the GDPR and the upcoming legislation around AI is really interesting legislation, because So we've created AI laws that are not very specific because they want to protect us from known harms and from unknown harms. So we have a legislation that is not too, it doesn't tell you exactly what to do. It tells you about broad principles. But what the legislation says is it's a responsibility of the market to come up with the practices. So I want to make sure that you protect all these rights, and you need to decide what the practices are. Like what we are proposing is you need to audit. Someone else may propose an oath. Someone else may propose something else. But it is up to the market to decide what are the trust-building tools that you need for your system right now. And I think that the private sector also needs to step up their game. And actually, our main source of clients is the private sector. The companies that want to do things well and that want to be at the forefront of building trust with their clients. And following on the example of the car, I always use the example of Volvo. The seatbelts were not imposed by a public administration. The seatbelts were invented by an engineer at Volvo, and Volvo decided not to patent the seatbelt because they saw so much potential in it saving lives that they just gave it to the world. They didn't want to make money out of it. But up until now, Volvo is a brand that is associated with trust and security on the road.
Well,
so
also
we need those
if you,
kind of
if
institutions
you
and
patent
companies.
something that is for safety, maybe people won't trust it. That's another thing. It's the same like self-driving cars, right? Like all the systems need to be open so people see it.
Exactly.
So
But you know, maybe another CEO at Volvo would have decided, oh, we're just going to privatize it. But they had the vision at that point. And I think we need the same thing. Like we need the companies that want to be like Volvo and invent the seatbelts and put them up there and have not an immediate benefit out of it, but actually contribute to shaping the future of AI. I think that's really what we need. And that means step up our game at all levels, public, private, individual. All of us are at a crucial moment in time. And I think we're not doing it as well as we should. So we do need to step up our game.
All right, we need to do that then. Step up our game. Right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.